followed by a crisp and positive deal. But now the actual arm wrestling has begun. David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, is our man on the side of the table.
I feel I should exercise it.
And Mr. Davis, right at the beginning of this process, back at the time of the referendum, you told people this would be a straightforward, you suggested it would be almost a breeze, these negotiations. Is there a danger that people watching now are going to feel they were misled?
No, I never said it was a breeze. And in fact, if you read the articles as well as the speeches I made, I said it'll be turbulent, there'll be difficulties, but at the end of the operation, there is a point of common interest to both sides, where we gain by being able to exploit global markets, where they gain by having a friendly and comfortable ally, not an irritating member of the club.
Now, you invited me to read your speeches, which I'm now able to do.
Go on in.
This was what you said about the economic case for Brexit during the referendum campaign. You said the first calling point of the UK's negotiator in the time immediately after Brexit, that's you, will not be Brussels, it will be Berlin to strike the deal. Absolute access for German cars and industrial goods in exchange for a sensible deal on everything else. So have you called Angela Merkel?
You'll be glad to know I've been to Berlin. I haven't called Angela Merkel. I've talked to her premier advisor on the matter, if you like. But, you know, we're not going to get, I mean, if you want to talk about Germany, we're not going to get the response from Germany, I don't think, until their election's over. We're going to get a lot of preparatory work before then. It's one of the reasons I'm happy to let October come before we start that.
But you basically argued that the German car industry and German industry generally would put pressure on the German Chancellor, who would put pressure on the EU to ensure that we got a good deal. Is that still your view?
Oh, that's where it'll end up, yeah. I mean, it's not just the German car industry. It's Bavarian farmers, French farmers, Italian white goods manufacturers, you name it. The balance of trade basically is 230 billion from us to them, 290 billion from them to us. They have a very strong interest in getting a good deal at the end of the day on all sides on trade.
So you remain breezily optimistic about it all. You are, however, we've had the election campaign, we've had lots of changes in the atmosphere. You are now surrounded by a whole bunch of eoring at you, including the Governor of the Bank of England, who said that this country is now dependent upon the kindness of strangers, and indeed the Chancellor of the Exchequer as well. Are you irritated by the noises off at the moment?
No, I mean, this is unsurprising, frankly. There are lots of different interests around the UK, all of whom quite properly are fighting their own corner. The bank is very concerned about the city and the financial sector, amongst other things. Manufacturing.
About the economy
generally. And the economy generally, yeah. I mean, actually it's a very interesting speech. I read it in detail. There's a lot more in it than what you just described. Of course they'll make their cases, but at the end of the day, the key in any negotiation it's not about sort of macho clashing of antlers. It's about finding the place that suits both sides, and that's what we're about. That's the way we're going. You see it even this week in terms of putting to them the citizens' rights issue. It's trying to find the place that suits both sides.
Are you absolutely sure we will get a deal?
I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% sure. You can never. It's a negotiation.
Because you said, again, you said right at the beginning of this, we are guaranteed to get a deal. You can be sure we'll get a deal.
You can be sure there'll be a deal. It's the deal I want, which is the free trade agreement, the customs agreement, and so on. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not certain.
And do you think we'll lose anything to get the access to the single market? Because, again, you said to Andrew, I think it'll be a very easy, not easy, but very straightforward negotiation.
Yeah. Not easy, I said. That's the point. Yeah. And there'll be things getting in the way. I mean, let me take an example from this week. We've just put up a proposal for to give EU citizens in the UK a set of rights and to give British citizens on the continent a set of equivalent rights. Okay. Now, what we've set out to do is to create a status almost equivalent to the same as British citizens. They get the same residence rights, the same employment rights, the same health rights, the same welfare rights, the same pension rights, and so on. Almost equivalent to British citizens. The only thing they don't get is the right to vote, and they can get that if they become a citizen. And we're asking for the same the other way. The argument now is going to be more about whether the European Court of Justice has a say. And that's where the fight comes in. That's where the argument comes in.
That's one of the places the argument comes in. The reason it didn't go down terribly well on the continent was they felt they got a headline and not a lot of the detail they needed to know. For instance, can you tell us anything about the cut-off date? I mean, if there are people watching this programme from the continent, which they can do these days, and they'll be maybe thinking, but I'm due to go and start my business in Wolverhampton next March or next April. Will I be relevant?
Well, with respect, Andrew, that's not right. I mean, that's what the headlines may have said. But if you look at what the Austrian minister said, or what the Polish minister, perhaps the most important in this context, the Lithuanian, the Italian,
the cut-off date is?
Well, we've said to them explicitly, it will not be any earlier than the triggering of Article 50, because we think that's fair. I mean, you could have said June 23rd last year when the referendum decision was taken, but there was a lot of people who didn't think we'd carry through with it. So we take the Article 50 as the minimum, and the maximum is the last day. And we will discuss with them what we think is the fairest and best way. And we have said explicitly, this is something we want to talk over with you. Not that we haven't got a view, but that we want to talk that over with you. There are other areas as well, quite small ones, but other areas as well where there are differences. But the main thrust of this is this actually gives an undertaking to all 3 million people in this country today
they
will have rights, effectively British citizenship rights, or the same rights as British. And the reason we cast it that way is because we were hitting a lot of stories coming back, particularly from Central Europe, where people were saying, oh, we're going to be made second-class citizens. No, that was the point, absolutely the point.
But people are still watching and wondering, will it apply to me, given how long I've been here? They want to know whether they'll be able to bring their relatives here and so forth. When are you going to give them more detail?
Well, all that's going to be published, there's about, I think it's a 15-page paper, something like that, being published tomorrow in front of Parliament. On Tuesday, I'm going to be writing articles in pretty much every city of the Union, not Dublin, because they're under a different.
Can you say any more about it just now?
Well, in terms of what we're talking about, the whole range of things, things we keep under our control, things we don't. The things under our control, for example, we're talking about continuing indexation of pensions to people who are in the EU. There was a concern about that. We thought that was important to do, and we can do that unilaterally. Other things,
access to health.
Well, other things. I mean, we're looking to see if we can get a continuation of the EHIC scheme as it now exists. And if, of course, if we can't get one, then we would provide one unilaterally anyway. But that's what we're looking to. We're trying to ensure that every individual citizen gets their current position, as it were, locked in place for them, so that they can be, so the anxiety can go. This is the real issue. It's about people's anxiety. It's not about the prospect of deporting people. It's about the anxiety that they can't stay. That's the real issue.
Will anybody be deported?
I don't think so, unless they've committed a crime or some sort of security problem. I don't expect that. It'll go back to the normal relationship.
On the EU giving our people the same results. So if there isn't a deal on that, then presumably all of this is up for grabs.
One of the things I generally refuse to do is go down hypothetical routes, because that sort of gives away too much. But the simple truth is, this is the option which we think can be resolved moderately quickly.
Now, you mentioned the court issue, because Mr. Barnier has said very clearly he thinks the European Court of Justice must have jurisdiction over this. Theresa May has said equally clearly, no way.
That's right.
There is a possible third way, I guess, which is we take some of their judges and some of our judges from the Supreme Court and put them onto some new court which has jurisdiction over both sides.
There are two parts to this issue. One is giving the people here confidence that the system will stay, that we won't just flip it over in another 5 or 10 years. We'll have British courts imposing the law from a British Act of Parliament underpinned by an international treaty.
They say that's not enough.
Well, and I say there are two arguments, depends who you talk to. When you look to the Council, this gets terribly technical, so I'll try and make it as simple as possible. When you get the Council handed down its negotiating guidelines, the European Commission then interpreted it. The Council's guidelines didn't mention the court. The Commission's did. So there's a little bit of ideology in this as well.
Right.
Now, there may well be, I mean, when we're doing all these deals on trade and other areas, there will be arbitration arrangements. There won't be the ECJ. There'll be a mutually agreed chairman and somebody nominated from both sides is the normal way. But there may be other ways too. And it may well be we have an arbitration arrangement over this, but it's not going to be European Court of Justice.
All right. Michel Barnier is somebody that you tangled with way back. As a trade, dealt with.
Yeah.
What's he like, and how are you getting on?
Well, he's very French, very logical.
What does very French mean? Slightly grand? Slightly grand?
Oh, he's very grand. He's very. I mean, he's a man of the. He comes from the mountains. Comes from Savoie. He's very elegant.
And not in a mood to compromise, he says.
Oh, well, let's see. I mean, you know, the issue is he wants a deal as much as we want a deal, I think. I mean, when he was the commissioner in charge of finance, the financial services, at first we thought he was terribly stiff and unmoving and so on. He eventually struck a perfectly reasonable deal. And I think we'll see the same here. It'll be stiff. It'll be small movements incrementally, and you won't. They'll be so small they'll be invisible sometimes, but they will matter and they'll happen.
He won round one, didn't he? You'd said there wouldn't be parallel negotiations over things like money and the European citizens' rights and the Irish border. Everything had to be done in parallel, and they said no, and they won, and you folded.
I think not. If we were on here 6 months ago, the Commission's position was we'll do the divorce arrangements for a couple of years, and at the end of that, you'll go into a transition arrangement, and then you do the negotiation then. Now, the Commission is looking to recommend parallel negotiations from October. That's what it's looking to do. I want to get the citizens thing through now. That's important. That's more important than having a row now. And Northern Ireland on the table. We won't conclude Northern Ireland this summer, but we will.
It'll be on the table.
Well, it's on the table.
Because you said yourself that we couldn't finally conclude it until we knew what the market arrangements were, the customs arrangements and so on.
Exactly, but it's technically difficult. It's perfectly doable, but it's technically difficult. Again, for your viewers, we want to have effectively an invisible border between the north and the south. Now, there are technical ways of doing that. Number plate recognition on vehicles, tagging of containers, trusted trader schemes. Quite a lot of very technical stuff, which has to be, we have to start on it now, so when we get to the end, we'll be in a position to actually implement it.
So no row of the summer, as we were being promised.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. OK, let's turn to the transitional arrangements, which are very, very important. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, your new mate, was sitting in that chair last week, and he suggested that they had to be quite long, that business was really worried about a cliff edge, and therefore years and years of transitional arrangements were needed. Is that your view as well?
Yes, I mean, he and I...
Yes.
Yes, basically. He and I have discussed this literally weekly since before Christmas. The issue was, up front, to get the European side of the negotiation to understand it was in their interest as well. And quite a lot of the non-negotiation that's been going on before now has been about that, about talking to them about what the impact for financial stability in Europe would be if we went suddenly from one regime to another, what the impact for customs would be if we went from one regime to another like that. And now
business is dead scared about this.
Of course, and we understand that well. I mean, that was one of the first things raised with us last August onwards, really. And we've discussed this with them, and we think that there will be a transition period, not that long. I mean, I think he said to you, actually, on your interview last week, there had to be over by the election.
3 or 4 years.
He said over by the election, actually, somewhere, anyway. I think 1 to 2 years is more likely. It will vary.
And during that period, we would still come under the jurisdiction of the ECJ. We'd still have to accept their rules, pay in, and all that.
We haven't said any of that. What we're saying is that let's start talking about how it will work. And exactly what it is. This is something incredibly practical. It's not an ideological thing. It's a practical and pragmatic thing. What will work best? What will deliver the outcome which suits both sides? I go back to what I said right at the beginning. We're looking for an outcome that helps both sides. Holland, for example, the Netherlands, huge amount of trade through Rotterdam. Right? They are very nervous, reasonably, as is Belgium. That they would get a shock effect if we didn't do something to stage things. So it's practical things like that we've got to get right.
Would no deal be better than a bad deal?
Well, as he said to you last week, I mean,
he said it'd be very, very bad.
But he also said, and he was right, because he and I discussed this too, that this started with suggestions that there'll be a punishment deal, that we would have to do worse outside. We don't believe we'll do worse. I believe we'll, in court, it'll take a couple of years, we'll do significantly better with the global markets. But we cannot have a circumstance where the other side says they're going to punish you. So if that happens, then there's a walk away, and we have to plan for that.
But he said it would be very, very bad.
Let's finish the analysis. Half my job is the invisible job, half, of actually planning for all outcomes, good to bad, or the whole range. And what we're doing at the moment is working that up. It'll take time. This is not the sort of thing you make up or write in a comment piece over a weekend. It is something you actually have to work out in great detail, and that's what we're doing right now.
I come back one more time. The Chancellor himself said it would be very, very bad. to have no deal.
It would be better than a punishment deal. That's as far as
Very, very bad. So it's two terrible outcomes.
I'm being very clear about this. It's in my job, I don't think out loud, I don't make guesses. Yeah? Those two things, I try to make decisions. You make those based on the data. That data is being gathered. We've got 50, nearly 60 sectoral analyses already done. We've got planning work going on the customs. We've got planning work going on 22 other issues which are critical, 127 all told. All of them have got to be grounded before we come to a conclusion what it looks like.
You've talked a lot about Philip Hammond.
Well, you have actually, but I'm not answering.
You've said that you've been talking to him weekly and you're clearly close to him and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Are you pleased to see him staying on as Chancellor?
Yes, of course I am. Of course I am. I mean, listen, one of the things that's a backdrop to what I do is the stability of our financial markets, of the country, the economy. The better that is, the more stable that is, the easier hand I have.
Right. Now, I could now come on cleverly to the leadership speculation and you could block it and we could have a completely pointless conversation.
It's all nonsense, I think.
So let me ask you something slightly different. Would it be catastrophic for our Brexit negotiations for the Tory party now to have a leadership contest?
Yes. Yes.
So,
listen, let me be absolutely plain about this. Number one, I happen to think we've got a very good Prime Minister. I know she's coming under a lot of pressure at the moment, but I've seen her in action. I've seen a number of Prime Ministers in operation over the years. I go right back to Margaret Thatcher. And I think she's very good. She makes good decisions. She's bold. She takes her time. There's no essay crisis about this government. It's very, very, very clear that she's a good Prime Minister. That's point number one. Point number two is I want a stable backdrop to this Brexit negotiation. It's hard work, by the way.
So what's your message to those Tories who are already ruffling around in the rhododendrons, muttering about leadership challenges and groups and who's going to take on who?
Don't be so self-indulgent, is my message to those, in terms. Stop being so self-indulgent, get on with the day job, which is that people put us here to deliver, well, amongst other things, deliver a decent economy, to deliver a decent life for them, and of course to deliver Brexit in order to deliver all those things. So, the more you do of that, the more self-indulgent nonsense you go in for, the more difficult you make it to do our proper job.
But the self-indulgence is coming from David Davis supporters too. You were at a meeting where there was one of the MPs there said, you should be our next Prime Minister, and there was either a great swell of applause or a scattering of applause, depending on who you read.
And I said afterwards, our job is to support the Prime Minister and make Brexit work, not anything else.
That's admirably clear. Yeah. So you could say, like Boris Johnson, you're not going to stand against her until Brexit is done. Probably not ever.
Look, I'm not going to get into it. I said it's self-indulgent. Even, frankly, the fact that we spent 2 minutes on it is self-indulgent.
2 minutes.
It's still 2 minutes too long.
All right, let's go back. We haven't talked since the election in this way. Was it true that you advised Theresa May to call that election?
Yep.
Do you regret it?
I take my share of the blame for it, along with the other 20 members of the cabinet who also said it was a good idea.
But you particularly went in and said it. Do you regret it? Did you apologise to her?
No, I didn't apologise to her. I mean, I didn't.
You can now if you'd like to.
I didn't design the campaign, So it's,
right.
I thought we'd get a better result than we did.
What did you think of the campaign?
Well, it didn't work, did it? I mean, that's the simple truth about it. You judge a campaign not by what you think of it. Every campaign. You get critics along the way. Every campaign has a wobbly Wednesday, whatever it is. If it succeeds, it succeeds. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It didn't.
And this really matters to you because you said during the campaign that if we come back with a great big majority, that strengthens my hand in the Brexit negotiations. The fact that you actually went backwards presumably has given you a weaker hand in the Brexit negotiations.
Well, it's given us a different hand. I mean, I would have liked to have had a 100 majority for other reasons, frankly, but it gives us a different hand. It's very interesting. During the campaign itself, Brussels was briefing, if there's a big majority, it means she can make more concessions. So I'm afraid what I said back to them when I last saw them was actually it's a very small or blank majority, so it's going to be a very narrow window to aim for. You can deal with everything you're given, every hand you're given.
But you look at the numbers in the House of Commons now and where MPs stand on Brexit, and you are much more vulnerable to assaults from the House of Commons on your negotiating position. I'll give you an example. Yeah. What happens if you bring the Great Repeal Bill onto the floor of the House of Commons and you lose on those votes?
Well, I think it'd be very improbable we do. in the Great Repeal Bill, and he couldn't give you an answer. I mean, you asked him 2 or 3 times, I think, and he couldn't give you an answer.
But he did reserve the right to oppose it.
Yeah, of course he does. I mean, look, Labour opposed the Maastricht Bill, even though they agreed with every word of it. So, we might get cynical opposition. If we get cynical opposition from the Labour Party, I think that the public will draw a conclusion. And this little wave of euphoria we're seeing now around Mr Corbyn may suddenly evaporate. The point about the Great Repeal Bill, just so your viewers know, is it takes European law and puts it into British law, so there's no black hole when we come out the other end. And that is very, very important. If somebody disrupts that, they're taking on themselves the responsibility for making the British statute book, the British law, unworkable when we leave the European Union. They really want to do that? I don't think so.
What about austerity? Because that's been a big issue. You're a working class boy originally. You understand why people are so fed up with the years and years and years of cuts and so forth. Again, you could face revolts on the floor of the House of Commons.
Well, I mean, to be fair to Philip, to be fair to the Chancellor, he actually eased it slightly. In his first budget, he eased the trajectory.
And it's going to be eased more, isn't it?
And I don't know. You should have asked him that, not me. But
I did. Well, and he said more or less yes.
Well, all right, then I'll go with the Chancellor's answer. But the simple truth is, when we came in, we had a deficit of 151.7 billion. It's now down to 51.7 billion. Every pound of that is taxes imposed on our children. That's the thing to remember. Every pound is taxes imposed on our children.
But there may be tens of billions of pounds for leaving the EU as well to be paid.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, tens of billions seems a fair assessment of what they're saying.
Let's see where we get to on that. I mean, the negotiation hasn't started on that, and it won't finish for quite a long time. You won't know the answer to that for a year or two. So I wouldn't get too bogged down in that. But the simple truth here is we've got to deliver a strong country, jobs, which we are delivering, incomes, protection for
one very important, very final question. Has this interview been patriotic enough for you?
I prefer forensic to patriotic. It's certainly always that, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed, David Davies. That's all we've